Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Between selling an apartment versus keeping an audience before lunch, I would probably pick to be a salesman on this industry. But however, I'm confident that we have an excellent panel. So looking forward for an insightful conversation. I would like to start with Dr. Coomaraswamy. Dr. Coomaraswamy, when I was having a conversation with one of the main construction suppliers, what he said was the sector is still slow because people are keeping one foot on this side and thinking another land in somewhere else. So you are not doing the real investment here because they all still have doubts about the economic stability, whether it's stable, what we need to do, whether are we in the right path. So could you shed some light for any market to prosper, including the real estate and the property market? Is our economy stable? And what is the future would look like?
Thank the organizers for inviting me to be part of this impressive show. The answer I would give you is significant progress has been made in stabilizing the economy. I think all of you know that, from where it was 2.5 years ago in terms of all the indicators, the macro indicators, growth, inflation, the external reserves, whatever indicator you look at, things have improved and the economy has stabilized. But the question we need to ask is, how far have we progressed in making sure we've got away from these repeating cycles of macro stress? Because we've stabilized before. We've had 17 IMF programs, completed 11 or 12 of them. On each of them, we actually managed to stabilize the economy. But then we don't do the structural reform to have sustained growth, right? So 2 questions. One is, have we created conditions where it becomes much less likely that we will have macroeconomic stress? And the answer is yes. We have a new paradigm of macroeconomic management because of 2 bits of legislation. 1, the Public Finance Management Act, and 2, the Central Bank Act. Historically, all these kind of repeating cycles of when I say macroeconomic stress, I mean high inflation, currency depreciation, taxes being changed. This happens again and again. So what I'm now saying is, because of these 2 bits of legislation, the prospects of that being repeated are much, much less. So why am I saying that? One is the underlying cause of this macro stress most of the time is the government's budgetary operations. The government runs unsustainable large budget deficits. That pumps too much aggregate demand into the system, pushes up prices, and some of that aggregate demand goes into imports, and we run into a balance of payments crisis. And that problem is amplified by the central bank having fiscal forbearance in monetary policy. What does that mean? The central bank prints money for the government. The central bank artificially reduces interest rates so that the government can borrow cheaply. So all this again amplifies the excess aggregate demand in the system, right? Interest rates come down, people take more credit, more demand, and no matching increase in supplies. Again, pressure on prices, pressure on the balance of payments. So what I'm saying is the budget is an underlying problem. The central bank activity then makes things worse. Now, that now by law cannot happen. Because what the Public Finance Management Act has done is that it has tightened the fiscal rules. We've had a fiscal rule before, but in the interest of time, I won't go into all that history. But right now, there are clear fiscal rules. The revenue is 15% of GDP. There has to be a primary surplus meaning total revenue minus expenditure, excluding interest payments, must have a surplus of 2.3%. There is also a cap on primary expenditure, that is expenditure minus interest payments must be 13%. So there are these tight rules. So clear fiscal rules. In the past, we had a fiscal rules, but it was sort of 10 years down the line, and every time we got close to it, the parliament changed the rule. Now, every year you have fit into these rules on the fiscal side. So the underlying problem that has been there in the country's macroeconomic management has been taken out. And equally, the fiscal forbearance, as I said, in monetary policy has now been also eliminated. The central bank cannot lend to the government. There is no deficit financing the central bank can do. The central bank cannot by law print money to help the government. And on top of that, there is a flex, I won't go into the detail or the technical detail, but there is a framework for monetary policy called flexible inflation targeting. The finance minister sets the inflation target, then the central bank has instrument autonomy to hit that target. So you don't artificially bring down interest rate just to boost growth, just because the government is going into an election. All that stuff you can't do anymore. So clear rules, not only clear frameworks, rules, and they are embedded in the law. So this is a completely new paradigm for macroeconomic management in this country. So the past experience of constantly having interest rates going up, exchange rate depreciating, taxes having to be changed, all that which were characteristic of our macroeconomic management should be a thing of the past. So interest rate should be more stable, exchange rate should be more stable, and the tax structure should be more stable, and it should be easier for you all to do business in this environment.
Thank you, Dr. Coomaraswamy. Thank you very much for setting that context. So what I gathered from you is it's better than it was, but because the institutional structure has been pretty much developed with the new regulation, so we can be somewhat hopeful if the same structure remains, that there will be, provided that we also do some structural reforms,
correct,
then it could be good for the property markets. I will come to the details, but I would like to move to Mr. Brahmanage. So after pandemic, now Dr. Coomaraswamy provided the color of what basic changes that took place. But when it comes to the property market, what's the trend looks like after COVID, after economic crisis? Is it picking up? Or what do you expect to see in the next few years?
It's basically after the pandemic and after the economic crisis, we'll have to see what happened at the economic crisis. The construction and real estate sector has come down drastically. No wonder, because we had the interest rates are shooting up, inflation is going up, then there were import control, the rupee was depreciated heavily, and then then there was imports control, and then the taxation, the VAT and all that has been increased, and all that happened. And on top of that, the supply chain disrupted, and also the building material prices were drastically and unfairly increased by the building material manufacturers, and that resulted the building cost has gone more than 75%, 100%. And as a result, the entire industry had faced with a lot of problems. Now of course some sanity has come, the stability has come, as Dr. Coomaraswamy mentioned. We have better interest rates, and also inflation rates has now stabilized, and also the total building material prices and construction cost has come down. But still, in Sri Lanka, the building material cost is the second highest in South Asia. And however, now the situation has improved drastically. People are investing in real estate. People have found that the real estate is another asset class where they can rely on, where they can see that it can be a creator of wealth and a future creator of equity. So as a result, a lot of people are now looking at real estate not only to live, but also as a short-term, medium-term, and a long-term investment. So as a result, we see a lot of demand has increased. And what happened in the last 4-5 years, the whatever the stock has, because people have stopped construction, there are not much finished products in the market, and there are no housing, very less houses are there. As a result, definitely we are very bullish real estate is going to be a key driver of the economy as well in the next 4 to 5 years.
Thank you, Mr. Brahmanage. Thank you very much. Next, I would like to move my attention to Nadeem. So, the context here is, okay, there's some stability at the overall economy, and the cost of construction has gone up by about 75% to 100%, but it seems it's slowly picking up. And which sectors that people should put their buck back, whether it's commercial, whether it's residential, or how do you see it's, is it mixed? Or in this context, how someone who is planning to invest in real estate should look at?
Yeah, so I'd like to just set some context before getting into this. If you look at Sri Lanka and where we are right now, and the occupied housing in Colombo, about 13% of our occupied housing are currently apartments. Now you compare that to the region, you compare that to Kuala Lumpur, it's 50-60% plus apartments in the city. Mumbai, as high as 80 to 90% in the core of the city. Singapore is almost 100%. So Sri Lanka is still at its infancy in terms of apartment living. And what's happening now is, because back in the day, you know, people prefer to have the big houses with the land, with the garden. But today, you know, one thing is with the cost of construction and also the pain that you have to go through in terms of building your own house. The other factor is also location, because if you want to buy a land and build your house today, it'll have to be in the outskirts. You're going to spend 2-3 hours commuting each day. In fact, we did a calculation here on your full working life. It could be 2 to 3 years of your life you spend in a vehicle just going up and down. So people are starting to think of this now and trading kind of size and houses for convenience and location in the heart of the city. And we are seeing this trend very clearly happening with most of our developments. I mean, people who initially bought our developments saying, I'm buying this purely for investment, today we see them actually living there. Or they're using it as a weekday pad, or just during the day for their kids' classes to make sure, you know, they have a convenient location. So these are the factors that are going to shift where people will move from kind of landed housing to apartments. And that's a natural shift that's inevitable. Because if you look at countries like Malaysia, even Singapore, they've been through this 20, 30 years ago. And the reason why I take Malaysia also as a good example is about 20, 30 years ago, their population was very similar to Sri Lanka. Their GDP was very similar to Sri Lanka. And of course, now Malaysia is far ahead, but that's kind of the growth trajectory we could get with economic stability going forward. So I feel there's still a lot of scope in residential real estate going forward. And, you know, people might think the pricing today in certain segments are quite high, but you look at the replacement cost of the completed developments. You can't build it at the current price point that we've done it at. And in the future, I mean, still, if you compare our pricing to the region, even on the luxury end, we are at about $300 to $500 per square foot. And the region could be well beyond $1,000 to $1,500 even in places like Mumbai. Singapore could be over $2,000 to $3,000 per square foot. So Sri Lanka is still at a fraction of the price of the region. So that's where I see there's a lot of potential and a lot of upside for residential real estate. Of course, the last couple of years, there was a bit of a slowdown due to the economic situation. But as Premalal said, now we're seeing a good pickup with inflation and interest rates coming under control now. And with rates being at just over 10% on borrowing rates, 10 to 11%, we're seeing a lot more people also taking mortgages. But the big game changer for real estate in Sri Lanka will be an attractive mortgage proposition, because majority of our buyers are still, you know, buying with their own funds. But we have to change that. And I think that's something even the banks need to get together, come out with more innovative mortgage options for customers, so that, you know, even when you're looking at a customer or a young professional, you need to think of their kind of working lifetime and their progression when you're kind of getting these mortgage facilities in order. Because otherwise it's very prohibitive for a lot of young professionals to get into real estate. So that's something that John Keel's Properties is at the forefront, working with some of the leading banks. And to your question, I think, yes, there's still a lot of potential on the residential real estate space.
Thank you, Nadeem. Now I would like to move to Kishore. Now, I think the context is Nadeem brought the insight that people are now willing to trade between the convenience versus building to move to the city center, and that's where investors like you come into play. How do you evaluate the investor sentiment, investor environment after this roller coaster ride for the last few years? And now it seems picking up, but how is maybe the consumption may be slowly picking up, but as an investor, how do you evaluate the investor environment?
So good afternoon, everyone. I think good question, but I always think that there is an opportunity whenever there is a crisis. So imagine if people would have invested when the crisis was just developing and the rupee was at 180, and later on, now we are talking about almost double the prices. So one thing that we realize in real estate is the price adjusts itself to the outcome of whatever the crisis was. So if you look at the prices that people bought an apartment at that time and now, nobody has literally lost anything. So there has been an investor sentiment that real estate is secure, real estate is good, and then we could always get back to liquidating it. It's pretty liquid in terms of when you need the money and other things. So investment-wise, people are looking at it. So post-crisis, like Dr. Coomaraswamy said, most of the things are in place. So the similar crisis or similar things happening again might not be a possibility, at least in the near future. So thinking about all those things, I think we have attractions of tourism growing up. So like Nadeem said, what is it that's required for everybody to come into the cities and start living? Density of population, of course, in Singapore or Malaysia and other places is much more. So naturally, the prices and everything goes up. So what is that is required for the density of population to come into the city? So that is something the government needs to work on so that people would move in, demand would pick in. One positive thing that has happened is we've hit probably the highest number of tourists in the month of January. So that's the number that we've not seen before. So that's a very positive sign. So real estate also, even apartments for that matter, demand tends to pick up when the tourism starts to pick up as well. You're renting it, there are short-term rentals and everything. So we are seeing positive signs. As an investor, I think we'd always look at what the opportunities were and what the opportunities could be. And looking at these numbers, I think we see a good opportunity in getting to it.
Thank you, Kishore. Thank you very much. Next, I would like to move to Mr. Jayasekara. Now, as a buyer, there's so many questions about whether on the legality side of it, how do you evaluate it, and at the same time, also for investors, there's a massive regulatory process. Could you shed some light on what a buyer point of view that they should look for? And are there any suggestions that this business environment can be made better?
Thank you, Dana. Then I'll just go through the approval process, that what are the things that you have to get as a developer. Then we'll discuss that what are the things that the purchaser must get to know about those things. Basically, that when a developer thinking of doing a condominium development, first approval is that you have to get a preliminary planning clearance. It's from the Urban Development Authority that you have to submit the preliminary drawings and the concept to them. Then they will give a document called PPC, Preliminary Planning Clearance. It says two sections. One is that they will tell you, go to these institutes and get their consent over clearance. It's like Central Environment Authority, Fire Department, Civil Aviation Authority, Water Board, Electricity Board, Condominium Management Authority, those things. Then that's the one part. Then you have to apply separately for those institutes and you have to get approval from those places. The next step is they will tell you these are the guidelines for building in this area, because there's a separate development plan for Colombo and separate development plan for Mount Lavinia, separately for Porte. Like that, accordingly that they will give you the guidelines. This is the flood coverage, this is the floor area ratio and those things. Then once you get all those institutional approvals and once you prepared your plans, you have to submit again to the Urban Development Authority. Then only they will issue the development permit. Development permit is the license to commence the construction of your building. Then that if you are thinking as a purchaser to off the plan, thinking of buying a property, at least you have to check from the developer whether do you have the development permit. Because without development permit, you can't build the building. That is number one. Then thereafter, once you obtain the development permit, you are commencing your construction. Once you complete your construction, then architect is issuing a document called Certificate of Practical Completion. It says this building built according to the approved building. But thereafter, the most important document is Certificate of Conformity. It means that the relevant local authority or the Urban Development Authority issuing a document saying that this building completed as per the approved building plan previously by them. That as per the latest regulations issued by Condominium Management Authority, it's in 2017, that's the only regulation they have issued. It's mandatory if a developer giving the occupation to an occupant, that you have to have the COC. Without COC, you can't occupy in a condominium building. So that if you are building, if you are thinking of purchase a unit and you are thinking of moving to, then you have to ask the COC from the developer. Then the next steps are, once you get the COC, then you have to get the approval for common amenities from the Condominium Management Authority. After you get COC and CMA approval only, you can submit your condominium declaration deed to the relevant land registry and registered as a condominium property. Thereafter only you will get your deeds. Then you have to be very careful on those steps and to be vigilant also. Say that sometimes some developers are that we know that the years and years taken to get the COC and the CMA approval, and sometimes no deed. That say that you have to very careful on those steps. And another thing, say although you have approvals, but the approval is just a piece of paper. If you are thinking of buying a property off the plan, please check the credibility and the capacity of the developer, whether they can build this building. That is number one. And the number two, although you have all approvals, including if you can get the deed and the condominium certificate, everything, but there might be some mortgages over the property. Maybe that from the balance money what they have to get from the buyers, that the remaining final installment from the buyers, that it might not meet the requirement from the bank. Then you might trap there. Then those things you have to think when you are buying a property.
Thank you, Mr. Jayasekara. Thank you very much. So I think you got a color of from the macroeconomy to the finest detail of what you need to think about when you are buying a property, also with the investor sentiment. Dr. Coomaraswamy, next I would like to move on and ask you about let's come back to a little bit of macro side. Now, what's the contribution of the real estate sector and the construction to the economy? Because the particular reason I'm asking that question, after war, there was a big construction boom, and of course our growth numbers were good. But again now, after we hit the crisis, there was again a conversation that okay, that growth was not sustainable, though it came from the construction. So our viewers, the people who are planning to buy a property may be in a confused stage. Okay, we hit for a crisis because economists are saying it was the unsustainable construction boom was in a way contributing to the crisis. And again, do we consider it as an option because it has become an asset class, so on and so forth? How do you think about it, and what's the contribution of the real estate sector to the economy?
So I think we need to distinguish between causes and symptoms. The boom in the construction sector was a symptom of underlying imbalances in the economy. You know, the excess aggregate demand that was pumped into the system by loose fiscal and monetary policies created a kind of a boom or a sugar high in the economy, which then also fed into the construction sector. So to put that right, you have to get the macro working. And one point I should make, these two legislative actions taken, the Central Bank Act and the Public Finance Management Act, I think we all need to protect them for all they are worth, because politicians will find them inconvenient. You know, after the crisis, they probably felt they had to do this, and it is also part of the IMF program which we crucially need. But as time goes on, they will feel tempted to dilute those acts, which means they're trying to go back to the same playbook which has put us in trouble again and again. Einstein said the definition of insanity is to do the same thing again and again and expect different outcomes, which is what we have basically been doing. So these laws must be protected. So you're asking me, okay, so in terms of going forward, hopefully if the laws are in place, we'll get a more stable environment and people can make investment decisions based on a more stable environment. But in terms of the prospects of the sector, we need to have growth in the economy. If you have a growing, buoyant economy, automatically that flows through to the public sector as well. And that is what we have not been good at. We have not been good at doing the structural reforms to get sustained growth. We create these sugar highs through unsustainable macro policies. Then from day one, we have already sowed the seeds of instability and crisis further down the line. But if we can do the structural reform, then what do I mean by the structural reforms? Things like the investment climate, SOE reform, investment promotion, trade policy, trade facilitation, education, training skills, you know, these are well known. In the 1980s, I was seconded from the central bank to the finance ministry to work for the late Mr. Ronnie DeMello was finance minister. So I became his bag carrier and followed him around. And he was talking about exactly these things 40 years ago. And we still haven't done it. So then you have to ask, why is it we haven't done it? I can think of two reasons. One is the gestation period for these structural reforms tends to be quite long, often more than one political cycle. So there is no real incentive for politicians to get them done. But probably the bigger, more significant reason is that while these reforms benefit many people, there will also be some very powerful losers. Few of them, but they're very powerful. And they have a vested interest in the status quo. And time and again, they've blocked the reforms. So we don't get these reforms done, and we don't get sustained growth. But if we're able to get sustained growth and keep these fiscal and monetary policy rules intact, then I think we'll have a much more stable environment within which people can make their investment decisions.
Thank you, Dr. Coomaraswamy. Nadeem, now in this context, one reason the stability has taken place in the macroeconomic environment is with the tourism flows and remittances picking up back. So at the same time, there's a conversation about attracting foreign investors and foreign buyers to the real estate sector.
Sure.
As John Keels, what do you do differently, or what do you do to attract foreign buyers and foreign investors? Because that's also part of the, in a way, the macroeconomic stability.
Sure.
And what do you do on that front?
Sure, sir. As at now, if you look at the foreign buyer base in all of our products, it's a very small percentage. And the foreigners that are currently buying in Sri Lanka are people that have some kind of business relationship or tie, or they have friends in Sri Lanka and they're investing. But we're not kind of getting the outright foreign investor coming in as yet. But I think, you know, there has to be also a concerted effort like what Malaysia has done with Malaysia My Second Home. Yes, there was the visa and the residency permit options that, you know, the government was trying to introduce, but still there's no clear-cut policy on that side. So I think that's something that we have to work together with the government to really have that concerted effort on the residency permits, because that's something that can attract investors from the region. The other thing I think we need to do is, you know, it can't be one developer going out there and trying to attract investments. I think the developers need to get together like Sri Lanka Tourism, and you take the Sri Lanka investment banner out. And then as a collective, you go out and you promote the investment proposition of Sri Lanka. And I think that's something us, Premalal, and the rest of the developers have to work together to go out as one voice. And then, you fight it out there, like with Sri Lanka Tourism, to get your clients in. But I think that's something that we really need to focus on. There is a lot of potential, but we need to, I think, also with the economy now kind of stabilizing, there could be a bit more positivity towards investments in Sri Lanka. But it will take a bit of time, but I think there's a lot more work to be done on that front.
Thanks, Nadeem. With that, I would like to move to Mr. Premalal. Now, that's the international or like attracting the foreign side of things. But when it comes to the local market, the domestic market, do you observe any behavioral changes where people wanted to buy land and like build a house, or whether they want to straight away buy a constructed house, or what are the behavioral patterns that you see, and how do you expect the trend to be changed? Nadeem earlier brought like trading off between convenience versus building on their own. What is your observation?
Yeah, while coming to your question, I think that I should address this real estate business because the real estate, especially the building, apartment building and the condominium and the houses, the government has not understand what is the vitality of this. Basically, we are contributing to the GDP of 7% or whatever, and also we calculated we are paying more than 35% to the government. We are paying 18% VAT on the sale value, then 2.5% to SSC, 20.5. Then when we are buying the land, we are paying 4% stamp fees. When we are selling, the customers are paying 4% stamp fees. Then on our profit, we are paying 30% corporate tax. Then on our dividends, we are paying again 15% dividend tax. When we employ the people like engineers, architects, QS, quantity surveys, and the project managers and all that, they pay 36% of their earning. When you really calculate on the total building, on the sale value, we are paying straight away contribute to the government 35 to 40%, which any government has not understood so far. When we purchase the land, immediately we pay 4%, and from the time we buy the first cement bag, out of that 20.5% we immediately pay. It is not after the building is constructed. The moment the building is constructed, it is going to be paid to the government, and on the total value of the building, 35 to 40% is government stake. But I'm sorry to say that none of the government has understood the contribution from that. Other than after that, the foreign exchange coming from so we go out and we promote our products in Dubai, then Australia and all the other countries, and we bring the foreign exchange here. But that part has been completely forgotten. So that is the one that is really sad about it. Then when it comes to what is your question now?
My question was on the behavioral changes, whether it's how people move. But I think what you made was also relevant, because what you say is it's sounded to me like you are in the business of paying taxes, and in the middle of it you're also doing some property while you are.
Our buildings are not built on cement and sand and steel. It is building on taxes and interest.
So yes, any behavioral changes that you see, and big. Very important point, because you said because the cost of construction is high.
Yeah.
Was it driving any behavioral changes? Because you brought the valid point, because you have to make an upfront investment as a tax. Like when you're buying a bag of cement, you're not claiming it after you build the property. You're paying it upfront. And as advocate in our institutional capacity, what we have been advocating is to bring down the cost of construction down, because it's one of the highest, as you mentioned, in South Asia. So is it driving behavioral changes?
No, the behavioral changes is driving. Of course, the construction cost is, of course, has affected the margins as well as the sale price and increase the sale price and so on. But right now there is a huge demand for the houses and the apartments, and people are shifting from the buying a land and building house to go into a gated community houses or an apartment, where that is tremendously easy. Then you will have security, you will have all the other amenities, there won't be power cuts, there won't be water cuts, and the housekeeping will be there. And on top of that, when we build, we hire all the top consultants, all the architects, all the engineers, all the MEP engineers and so on. When you go and build a house, you cannot do that. You may be hiring an architect, maybe a structural, some people, structural engineer also won't be there, the Basunai will be doing there. So you get the top of the cream of the consultant's input in there. So you cannot really value there. And as on top of that, we are building communities. There you will have a like-minded, same social status people. They are surrounded by friends will be there, and so that we are creating livable communities. So as a result, a lot of people now they understood, especially youngsters and even the parents now they are understanding and they are moving into apartments or the houses. So there's a tremendous positive movement is there. As Nadine said, still our concentration on the apartment about 30% now.
30.
So we have a lot of go. But we will have to innovate. We will have to reduce, how to reduce our financial cost, how to reduce our cost of construction. We are also working on that. So that's how we...
Thank you, Mr. Premalal. I would like to move to Mr. Jayasekara. Now, one thing that brought out was the high cost of construction, and when you were answering my initial question on what to look at, it sounded like, additionally to the taxes he mentioned, a lot of regulatory work like this license, that license, and recently the president himself said like for taking a business license, you need to go to about 82 institutes at the business level. So do you have, I can see some of the journalist friends are also here. Probably they will have a good story to report with the budget coming on Monday. Are there any regulatory reforms that can make this cost down? Any changes that you recommend? Because you as a lawyer go through this process pretty much all the time. Any changes that you would like to recommend which can have a cost impact in terms of the time value of money and the net present value and what the government could do?
When you are talking about the regulation, actually I am thinking on other way, because say now there are rules and regulations, we have to go to around 10-12 institutes. But the thing is that all these institutes are vital. Say that you have to get the environment approval. Without environment approval, you can't do a construction. You have to get the infrastructure, that the water, electricity, those things, you have to go to those institutes. The only thing that you can try and cut down the time period, okay, that you can do, but these things are essential. And top of that, there are few things that I have in mind, because now UDA giving a building permit to anybody, even you don't have any single cent to your hand. In this entire process, they are not asking from you, even you do have a bank account. If you have a land, even you don't need to own a land, you can have an agreement with somebody else. And you have an architect, do a nice drawing and submit this drawing to the UDA, and you can get it approved for a 10 billion project. Even you don't have any single cent in your pocket. That you have to drastically change in this process, have to introduce some developer evaluation process, and you have to ask person, do you have money to develop this? Because everyone knows how many development projects failed during last couple of years. This might be a main reason, because that the developer also thinking that I can do this thing without their financial capacity. And the people thinks that okay, they have the approval, it means they can do this thing. Then this mismatch we have to address. That is number one, we have to address immediately this issue. And also, in most of the countries we heard about escrow accounts, because that the developers are taking others' money and they build on that money. But no one knows where to this money is going. But the most of developed countries, or even the Asian countries like Singapore, this money is only going to the escrow account, then the escrow account releasing only for development purposes. But here there is no rules, regulations covering this, that you don't know when you are investing, they are asking installment and installment, you are paying. Sometimes delays, sometimes even not coming out of the ground. That this escrow account matter, I think that the central bank also proposed few years back, but it never materialized. That should be there. Then in that our apartment ownership law first introduced in 1973 and now it's 50 years. There is no single word about the protection of buyers, that we have to change, we have to include those clauses. That if you go to condominium management authority for delaying or not building your building, that the only one clause they can follow and they can file a case, that there's a clause saying that when you enter into sale agreement within 18 months from the sale agreement, you have to complete the building. That's the only protection that they can talk about you when an innocent buyer going to condominium authority. That is where we are now, that we have to introduce some laws to protect innocent buyers. And top of that, this regulation, I know that normally it will take 6 to 2 years to get all those approvals. Sometimes that the developers are coming, then they will go back that, because that the foreign investors especially, they are not waiting for 2 years to get approvals. So we have to cut down these things, and we have to introduce some quick processes, but these approvals should be there.
Thank you, Mr. Jayasekara. Kishore, with that, are there any restrictions that further delays or restrict the foreign investors to come to Sri Lanka and invest in the real estate sector? What's your experience?
See, I think all the points you mentioned is pretty much valid, where anybody, why would somebody come and invest here? It needs to be attractive. So one of my friends actually said this. I think this is a nice story for everybody. If there are 3 friends who invite you to a party, one has good food, one has good music, one has good atmosphere in the whole place the party itself, where will you go? None of these. You would go to a place where you feel welcome. You might have good food, but if you're not made welcome, you're not going to go there. So this is something that any investor would look at. The whole world is asking everybody to come where it mentioned, like Malaysia would say the same, Thailand is going in, attracting, Vietnam is doing the same. There's so many people attracting investors to do it. So you would go to a place where you are actually made welcome. So that's the key of any investment to come in. Saying that, if you basically get somebody to come here and then you say there are so many regulations, nobody is going to come in, because there are countries which are actually developing and putting in rules saying that you put in an application, if it is not approved or objected by the authorities for some reason, it is deemed approved in 2 weeks' time. States in India do that. Who's the biggest competition to attract investments from India to Sri Lanka? Are the states in India itself. Each one is competing against themselves. Each one is basically providing more and more facilities. Sri Lanka was an example for growth and everything probably 2 decades back. India is to look forward to see. Now when you look at it, other states in India have really overtaken. They've really grown up. The deemed approval process of Telangana is something which is taken up as an example by majority of the states. If you don't give an approval, it is considered it's approved. If you don't object for a valid reason, then it's considered it's approved. So these are the things that we need to look at. One of the things that we were talking about is visas for investors to come in. If somebody comes in, they need to have a visa to live in. We haven't had a process of somebody buying an apartment, getting a visa. And I think a very good thing was at the Condominium Developers Association, me and Premalal, we were talking of the same thing, where buyers who have spent millions of rupees in buying the apartment from abroad, and they don't have a permanent resident visa to live in the apartment. They need to take a visit visa every single time. And saying so, the last government gazetted the law that, okay, if somebody invests in an apartment, they will get a resident visa and all these things. So there were 2 buyers from Primeland who actually went to the immigration and said, we've invested, as per the gazette, we need the visa. We're talking about probably 7 months, they still haven't got their visa. And the reason being, they said, oh, the systems are not in place and other things. So these are the things that we need to address. It's not just regulations from the government side to put in and say, you need to follow this, and various other things. But from the government to say why you should come, why you should invest in Sri Lanka, make it Sri Lanka an attractive proposal. First, we should look at why Sri Lanka more than anything else, saying why John Kids, why Premalal and anything. First thing everybody is looking at is why Sri Lanka. Is it conducive to invest? Is it conducive to live? Do people make me welcome and feel welcomed at least, and then will they do this? So these are the things. I'm actually against regulations. More and more regulations you put in, you're actually cutting down on, you need to be facilitators than regulators. So facilitation is something like, let's say a tourist board was a facilitator to attract tourists into the country. Eventually they became regulators and they say why you should not be doing so and so, why you should not be doing this. So there is a difference between facilitators and regulators, and we need more facilitators than regulators.
Thank you, Kishore. Me being the facilitator, I would like to get your facilitation on shooting questions. If you have any questions, I think you can quickly ask those. We can take few questions and wrap up. I think we can see 2 hands. Over to you. Do we have a microphone? Yes. I think the microphone is coming. We'll take few questions in the same round. The front seat, yes.
Thank you. The discussion was actually very, very interesting. So I have a couple of questions, please bear with me. Dr. Coomaraswamy, so you spoke about the regulations that have come in over the last few years to better manage the economy. So what will that actually look like, say, over the next year when the economy and inflation and everything start picking up? And then on the real estate side, so the presentation showed that there's quite a lot of supply coming online, and of course the local economy has come through a fairly difficult time, and of course the restrictions on foreign investment immediately. Is there capacity to absorb the supply that's coming online? And in that context, what is your opinion on the pricing of real estate as well?
Thank you. I think there was another question at the front. Yes.
It's actually a suggestion more than a question, what Reddy was mentioning, really, to facilitate the investors. I have felt also the similar situation because doing a thing in Sri Lanka is it's a very attractive, beautiful place, beautiful people, all that is there, but get things sorted is very difficult. So I earlier to the previous government also I have mentioned the problems I have in even exporting and clearing things in this country because of the regulations. So what I feel is now all the panel, I gained a lot of wealthy knowledge from the panel here today, this morning. We should actually have, in fact, all these people, the institutions who are trying to approve, or can't they come into under one roof? So make people easy for the investors instead of going from A to Z to so many institutions. It takes years to get things approved in this country. That's what I want to know, is it possible?
Thank you. Any more questions? Yes. We have another question at the front row.
This is a question related to the recent fire, twin fires at the Krish, which is also an abandoned project. Now, does the fire brigade have a facility to handle a fire that goes to maybe 35 floors, 45 floors? The only firefighting capacity in building would be the fire extinguisher. But have we addressed this issue? Because fire, I don't think, is something that is considered when you buy an apartment. I mean, you look at your water, you look at your electricity, but what happens if there's a fire on the 31st floor of an apartment or even a government building? Does the fire brigade have the facility to take it, to be able to handle it at that point?
Thank you very much. We have one more question. I think with that, I would like to move to the panel. Yes.
Yes. My question is regarding government approvals. in Sri Lanka, there are cases where the government deliberately sort of blocks your approval for dishonest reasons. Now everybody knows that Sri Lankan government officials have bribes, and when they don't get the bribe, they block it. But there can be other reasons also, personal dislikes, and when they have ulterior motives of trying to steal your land and things like that. Now, in foreign countries, do you have a proper mechanism to curtail that? For example, do the officials have to change once in 5 years? Or is there a special commission which you can go and lodge a complaint that even though you have done your part perfectly well, these government officials are not working, not doing their work? Everybody knows that the Sri Lankan approval process gets blocked and all that. But in foreign countries, how do they manage to expedite everything
Thank you.
well?
Thank you. I would like to get the fire question on an emergency basis, as usual. Who wants to comment on that? Yes.
So, regarding the fire, see, just because you build a 1,000-meter building, it doesn't mean that the fire departments anywhere in the world could reach that point to do the fire. However, there are regulations in the fire department itself. I mean, when you need to get the fire clearance, to a certain amount, a fire engine with the ladders and other things could reach, but then you need to create certain facilities that could fight the fire from inside the building itself. So things like you need to have wet risers going up from the bottom of the building to the top of the building is one of the things where you could connect if a fire department, somebody enters the building. When the Twin Towers in the US was bombed, the fire department people entered the building. They went inside to fight whatever the fire was there. So that is something that needs to be facilitated. Not that the fire department needs to have a fire engine that could reach up, right? So there are sprinklers, there are guidelines that says that you need, if your building is passing certain, I think 20 floors or something, right?
100 meters.
100 meters, 30 floors. Then you need to make sure that every floor, every premises, every room has a sprinkler system that would automatically come on when it is there. So these are the systems that needs to be in place, and fire doors need to be installed so that your staircases are free and the fire doesn't spread into the staircases. So various guidelines that are there, which are implemented, which I think the fire department does look into and give approvals. And it's the responsibility of the management corporation after the developer develops. These things are maintained well. Then if these are neglected, yes, there could be a problem and there could be mishaps that could happen.
Thank you very much. Next, Mr. Jayasekara, on the government approval process, do you have any best case examples in foreign countries on the last question we received?
Actually, he's asking that about the bribes and so that those things that you can't comment on because it's a subjective matter. But however, that for any institute, if you are not getting approval, there's an appeal process also. Even UDA, that if you are not getting the approval, you can go to the UDA Ministry Secretary. In each and every, even Sri Lanka, that each and every institute has the appeal process that you can go ahead. But the thing is that again the timing is the issue. That municipal council, you can appeal to the provincial commission of local government. Yes.
Okay.
See, there is also, sorry, I'll just touch one more point. UDA is the ultimate authority in approving building constructions and everything. If you are having issues even at the provincial council or whatever, UDA could take a call that, okay, if it's a bigger strategic development, they could give the approvals and they can do it. I think we had a meeting with the UDA, the present new chairman, and he actually guaranteed that the one-stop shop also that you had requested, they put it in place. But unfortunately, what happens, like the tourist board one-stop shop as well as the UDA one-stop shop is, you need to get 29 approvals. So they call 29 people to come over. Out of the 29, if 50% of them turn around and then 50 don't. So the system is not in place fully. However, the chairman actually said that they will try to speed up approvals within a span of like 2-3 weeks. They will try to do it. But UDA as an authority is an ultimate authority to give approvals and other things. If you have problems in the municipal council or something else, you could always approach the UDA to overrule if there is something that is not reasonable as well.
Thank you. The second question of, yes, on the demand and the capacity and the pricing, yes.
I think your question was on the absorption of apartments and pricing. So if you look at most of the completed developments in the city today, whether it's the luxury developments, mid-luxury, it's about 70 to 80% absorbed, about 80% sold in most developments. So there's only a very limited inventory remaining. And just drawing on our experience over the years, I mean, if you look at when we launched on 320 back in 2010-11, the land price on Union Place was about 4 to 5 million rupees a perch. Today, the land price on Union Place is north of 20 million rupees a perch. And construction cost, of course, has gone up exponentially over the years. And you're going to see that continue to happen. So to replace these assets that are currently completed, it's going to be much higher going forward. So that's where you're going to see the natural price appreciation happening. And as I explained earlier, if you compare it to the region, Sri Lanka's pricing is still quite attractive. And if you look at the core of the city, in the heart of Colombo, there's very limited land parcels that you can do these kind of developments. And in the future, with construction costs going up and pricing going up, most certainly the current pricing that you see today will appreciate in the future.
Dr. Coomaraswamy, the first question, how would be the outlook? Do you want to take that question? Yes, please.
Okay. You know, as I was trying to say at the outset, we now have a framework in place which shouldn't allow inflation to pick up. But that is on the demand side. But you can get exogenous factors which create supply side inflation. It could be international commodity prices. It could be disruption of global supply chains because of tensions, global tensions. So you can get these exogenous shocks which come in and create pressure on prices. Now for that, the central bank doesn't have the instruments to deal with that, because the interest rate is the instrument the central bank uses to calibrate demand in the system. But when you get that kind of shock, you really have to build buffers in the system. You need to have fiscal buffers, you need to have external reserve buffers, etc., to ride through those shocks which come from outside. So if you look at what the East Asian and Southeast Asian countries did after the East Asian crisis, they ensured themselves by building massive reserves now. So now, for instance, Singapore paid for all its COVID-related fiscal stimulus out of their reserves. They didn't have to increase taxes, do nothing. They had built up such reserves that they were able to basically provide support for businesses and individuals out of their reserves. So over time, we need to build up our reserves. That's what we need to do to make sure that inflation coming from outside kind of demand pressure is looked after. On the demand side, if we keep the laws in place and we stick to the laws, we shouldn't get inflation. And also the central bank now has this flexible inflation targeting, which is really a data-driven, forward-looking methodology. And they have now got improved forecasting and modeling capacity to be able to predict inflation 12, 18 months down the line. And because there is a transmission lag, because the monetary policy measures you take now, say you increase interest rates now, the full impact takes at least a year or more. So the central bank has now got the wherewithal to do all this. They are saying that inflation will go back close to the target, the 5% middle of the target, by the middle of this year, and next year it may even go a bit above that. So they now have to be proactive and take the monetary policy to make sure that inflation doesn't go beyond that.
Thank you, Dr. Coomaraswamy. Mr. Premalal, any final thoughts? I can see the MC at the podium, so that probably with the message that stop it, we have to break for lunch, but any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, basically when it sees the capacity and all that, we have been telling, we can export real estate. We can export real estate. For example, see, Dubai, their last year real estate sales was for $142 billion. It is closer to twice of our GDP. We are in a much better place than that. We can easily get Indian and other nationals and also our expatriates. They are waiting to come there. So they have gone 20, 30 years ago. Their children have now married and gone, and they are alone. They want to come at least during the winter season at least. So there are a lot of things that we can do. Only thing, there's no, the government doesn't understand, any of the governments, of the value of this real estate. We can export the, for example, we can have, there's a lot of, we are planning to from 2 million to 3 million tourists, right? So then where do they going to stay? So one of our apartments, most of our apartments, people, the tourists are there. So they're from Airbnb. So that like that, we can really attract. So when they come, they will be here. They will be here not for 1 visit. They will be here for next 10 years. And these people are not giving this 10-year visa. People who had given their 10-year visa, only 2 people, they are still denying it. So this is the very pathetic situation of the country. So we have, as he said, one-stop approval process. But this approval process, all the other institutions they are acting separately. One-stop approval process is taking more longer than the normal what we go, the other process. So unless we can really look at, somebody has to look at this and do that, then we can attract a lot of foreigners and real estate, and we can really sell, we can export real estate. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, with that, please give a round of applause to my excellent panelists for keeping an audience before the lunch break. Dr. Indrajit Coomaraswamy, Premalal Brahmanage, Kishore Reddy, Saminda Jayasekara, and Nadeem Shams. Thank you very much.